doing a right heart catheterization, whenever you enter a chamber, you should look at three things. One is most importantly the pressures, the sample, and whether you need to do an angiogram or not. These are the three things that you have to look at whenever you enter a chamber in any right heart catheterization. And then oxygen saturation and oxygen content in that. So based on that, we commonly calculate some of the hemodynamic variables, that is cardiac index and intracardiac shunt, that is whether there's a step up or step down in oxygen saturation. Based on that, we calculate QP, QS, and QEP. So can anybody answer what is QEP? Hello.
Effective pulmonary blood flow, that is blood flow is coming from the systemic vein plus the left to right and the total amount of blood flow.
So we calculate the left to right shunt based on QP minus QEP and right to left shunt based on QS minus QEP. Effective pulmonary blood flow is a physiological concept. It's not a real thing, but it's a physiological concept. The vascular resistances that we can commonly calculate are the PVR and the SVR. And based on the pressure gradients, we calculate the valve areas. These are, I think, some of the basics that I think all of you must be aware. So the flow calculation, that the one thing that you have, the cardiac index is cardiac output divided by body surface area. Whereas, what is the formula for PVRI? We'll come to that later.
PVR multiplied by body surface.
Yeah, why that happens?
So because QP
cardiac output.
Because QP is
so actually you index the cardiac index of the QP, where that becomes the denominator, like. So you end up multiplying when you convert PR into PVRI. Come to that later. So I think one thing that you should remember is what is the normal cardiac index, that is 2.4 to 4.4 liter per minute per meter square. That is what you should answer, like. And then normally all of you should be aware that cardiac index will be equivalent to QS, that will be equivalent to QP. So normally you should be able to immediately recognize the waveform that are shown, or oftentimes you may not have a labeled value, a labeled thing, what is the pressure trace. So I think you should know the waveforms. Based on waveform, you will be in a position to identify. Commonly in an RA trace, the pressures don't cross 10 in most of the situations, and you will get a A, C, and V waves, and a X descent and a Y descent will be there, which is like your JVP. And then RV will have, I will come to that, how the peak will be, how the trough will be in RV. Then you will have a PA, which is like a systolic pressures, and then pulmonary wedge will have A and B waves predominantly. Left atrium will have more dominant V wave and a A wave. And then left ventricle will be like you all recognize what is an LV and an iota, how they look. So this is a very important thing that is commonly asked, like what is a hangout interval and what is it? I think most of you are aware. But one of the most important things that you know is how do you identify an RV trace and a LV trace? So these are the differences. RV trace is generally triangular in shape, whereas LV shape is more or less, it's like upstroke is not rapid in an RV trace, whereas upstroke is very rapid in LV trace. Then you have, there is no sustained peak, whereas you have a sustained peak in an RV trace. This is like a jet case ejectua, and then immediately it starts falling down, and then it has an early fall. So the pressure falls to zero, which never happens in LV. This is a very typical feature of an RV trace. Pressure falls to zero. So a typical difference will be RV pressure is triangular in shape. The upstroke is not that rapid, and then there is no sustained peak, and there is a early fall, and the pressure falls to zero, which never happens with LV. And when you start doing cardiac catheterization, one of the most important that all of you should be aware is, most of you do adult cardiac catheterizations, and then you suddenly a baby comes, then you should do a cardiac catheterization. This has to be at the mid-axillary line. Your transducer should be at the mid-axillary line. That's a very important thing, which actually can make a difference in some of the patients' operability and inoperability decisions, and especially when you're taking length of your transducers. So actually, even 1 centimeter below the left atrium increases the pressure by 0.73 millimeter Hg. So these are the normal hemodynamics. Like all of you should be aware of what is the normal hemodynamics and what are the normal pressures in various chambers. And then SVC saturation is the most important thing, the first thing that you take up, and that gives you a very important clue of what is happening in the whole thing. So normally SVC saturation of 70 to 80 indicate that patient has some hemodynamic reserve. So I think the things are generally good. But generally, whatever be the anatomy, whatever be the physiology, there is little cardiac reserve if the SVC is clearly dark. Even you don't have to wait for the results to come, but if you are taking out an SVC which is dark, immediately you have to alert. And if you're doing alone, you call your consultant, you check the vitals, you check the oxygenation of the patient, and you check the cardiac reserve. And generally, if oxygenation, everything is fine, baby is otherwise all right, then likely to have very low cardiac output. That is what SVC of 30 to 40 indicates. So you have to look at ventilation, fluid status, and acid-base status before you proceed further. So this is the most important thing that you have to. Oftentimes in your exams, you are thrown a paper which has pressure data on the one side and oxygen saturation on the other side. It's a very common spotter that you are thrown in the exams. So what you should do is don't jump to any conclusion, don't jump to any diagnosis. Immediately start looking at in a fashion. So what you should do is, first of all, look at pressure data first. From pressure data, look at each chamber, whether they are normal or abnormal. Important thing is start linking pressures one after the other. What I mean by that is, so RA mean pressure is related to RV end diastolic pressure. RV systolic pressure is definitely related to the PA systolic pressure. Both should be equal. Same way, PA diastolic and PA pulmonary wedge pressures are related. And then LVED is actually representative of the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure in normal situation. And then will be equivalent to aortic pressure. So always mentally link the pressures, and immediately if there is a gradient, immediately it will come up. And in all the congenital situations, always try to link RA and LA and RV versus LV. How are the pressures? So this is how you should approach pressure data set that is given to you. So first and foremost thing is look at whether it is normal or abnormal. Look at link the pressures that is next in line, and start immediately. Once you do that, immediately the gradients will come up, and then start looking at the pressures between RA and LA, and then you look at the pressures between RV and LV. Another method that is being propagated is a box like this. Most of the examiners will not give you time to make these boxes, so I think better what I told you is better to follow that. But if you're allowed to make a box, then you can note down everything, like this is the SVC, this is RA, this is RV, and this is the pulmonary artery, and this is pulmonary vein. So you can note down the pressures and see how RA and LA are linked, LA and RV and LV are linked, how is the gradient, all those things you can make out. So this is what abnormal gradient are. These are the definitions. What is an abnormal gradient? Like mitral, any peak or end gradient is significant. Tricuspid greater than 2 is significant, whereas mean gradient of 5 is significant. Aortic and pulmonary is 25, peak gradient is significant, whereas peripheral PS in an arterial vessel, it's 20 mm Hg. That is what is a significant gradient, a hemodynamically significant gradient. These are all based on previous studies that have been done in various columns of experiments that have been done. So this is a classification of PH and PVH. All of you should be aware. I think should be aware of. And then how do you calculate pH and pH in children is a commonly asked question. So that is based on the percentage of systemic. It is 20 to 50, 50 to 66, and greater than 66 of systemic pressures. So coming to the next important thing is diagnosis of shunt lesions. Then you look at the oximetry trace. So what is a significant step up? That's a very important thing. So oftentimes you take only one set of samples. That means only one set is taken. Then you look at highest step up that is there. Then generally the values are inconsistent, and generally you need a higher step up to be significant. So it's always better when you're doing a cardiac catheterization. It's always better to take 2 samples at least and average out 2 samples. For example, SVC you take 2, PA you take 2, and FA you take 2. These are the 3 things that are essential for a QPQS estimation. So these 3 things you should take twice. So you should do the average of all of them. So average, if you take average, a significant step up is 7. If you take only one sample, it is 10, it's 11, 10, 8, and 5. So great vessel is 5 all the time. Then you can remember it. Ventricular level is 5 and atrial level is 7 each here. This is something that you all have to remember. This is what means a significant step up. What is a significant step down? When there is a desaturation, when there is an aortic desaturation that is less than 92 92, and any step down that are greater than 20 that is happening, that indicates a right to left shunt. So then once you know there is a step up, then you look at what are the causes of step up. Then if first of all, if there is a step up at the atrial level, so always think of what are the causes that can happen. Some mixing can happen, left to right shunt can happen into the atrial level, will be at that level, before that level, after that level, and something, all of the, all at all levels, some things can happen. So those all levels that can happen will be RSOB and coronary AV fistula. This will be common to all levels. They can actually happen to any level, except for RSOB into PA will be quite unusual. So, but then also you will have something else happening there. So step up at atrial level will be ASD, which is very simple. Then you have PAPVC and a LV to RA shunt or a VSD with TR. These are the things that can happen. So something can come from below upward, that is VSD with TR, or an LV to RA shunt can bring up step up at atrial level. What are the cause of step up at ventricular level? Obviously, VSD is very simple, but generally you remember that whenever there is a shunt lesion happening, oftentimes you can have mixing happening best at the next level. So you can actually appreciate a good amount of step up happening at the next level. So a low ASD actually produces a proper mixing, not on the RA, but best appreciated at RV level. And then PDA with PR, as I told you, one chamber above. So PDA with PR can produce step up at the ventricular level, and AVSD can produce step up at the ventricular level, and RSOB and coronary AV fistula can produce step up. What are the causes of step up at a great vessel level? PDA, aortopulmonary window, outlet VSD, and coronary origin of from pulmonary artery, and then RSOB and coronary caval fistula can produce. Coming to right to left shunt. So right to left shunt can start from pulmonary veins, like pulmonary veins can be desaturated. That could be because of a lung disease or hyperventilation or pulmonary AV fistula and pulmonary edema. So you have to check hyperventilation. How do you check for hyperventilation when you are doing cardiac catheterization? So how do you check for hyperventilation when you are doing cardiac catheterization? Is anyone there?
Carbon dioxide levels.
Yeah. You look at the PCO2 level. That is, I think you should do an ABG and you should check the PCO2 level when you are suspecting. For example, when you see a SVC which is desaturated, then you should immediately look at the ABG of the sample. Not only look at the saturation, but look at the ABG of the sample. Then pulmonary AV fistula and lung disease could be actually one pulmonary vein could be desaturated, the rest of the pulmonary veins could be normal. That thing can also happen. The cause of desaturation at a LA level, that is a left atrial level, will be Epstein's anomaly, tricuspid atresia, severe PS with TR, unroofed coronary sinus, and a very large ASD like a common atrium. They all will produce mixing happening. There is a right to left shunt happening at a atrial level. It's very simple. So something is preventing the blood from entering into the RV, and this blood is being from RA is going into RV. Either it is RV is hypoplastic, or Epstein's anomaly is there, or the pressures are too high like severe PS with TR, or there is mixing happening in LA itself, that is unroofed coronary sinus or a common atrium, or there is a, for example, anomalous systemic venous drainage. These are the very rare situations where actually there could be desaturation at the LA level. Desaturation at LV or aortic level is typically found in top and Eisenmenger VSD. And desaturation at a descending aortic level is Eisenmenger PDA, PDA with coarctant interruption. So we'll come back to the, as I told you, like QP, QS are pretty simple ones. And then Q effective is the quantity of mixed venous blood that reaches the lungs to be deoxygenated. That is what we are looking at. The quantity of mixed venous blood that reaches the lungs to be oxygenated. The real blood that reaches the lungs to be oxygenated is the Q effective. So calculate QP by the cardiac index is pulmonary venous oxygen content by pulmonary arterial oxygen content. It's all based on fixed principle. You think of it immediately, how much oxygen is getting in and how much oxygen is getting, what is the input to the pipe and output to the pipe. You think of a system, you are looking at the supply oxygen, where it's entering, where it is going out. What has been taken out. So that determines the cardiac output. So you calculate it by pulmonary vein minus pulmonary artery. Oxygen consumption remains constant. So pulmonary venous oxygen content minus pulmonary arterial oxygen content. That gives you a cardiac index which is equivalent to a QP also. Whereas QS is the aorta is the system here, and mixed venous is the amount that is taken out. So that is the aorta minus mixed venous oxygen content is QS. Whereas QEP is pulmonary vein minus mixed venous. So mixed venous, generally we take SVC saturation as mixed venous most of the time, because the 3 SVC plus 1 IVC by 4 is generally not needed most of the time. And generally we assume pulmonary venous 98%, or if you, unless you think there is a serious reason to assume something else. So this is a very prototypic example. So whether you understood the concept. So what will be the QPQS here? So you can actually look at the QPQS immediately. Immediately you can calculate the QPQS in this picture. So this is a kind of picture that is given in your exam also. You'll be asked to calculate the QPQS. So how do you do that?
3:1.
3:1. 3:1. Why do you say 3:1? How
30 divided by 10. 30 divided by 10.
Yeah. So all of you should be clear about this. This is something that is non-negotiable. That this everybody should know. Clear?
Hello.
Anybody has confusion in this? Okay. When you are doing also, immediately you can calculate. That is the importance of knowing this. Whether you need to do an oxygen study or not, all those things actually you can calculate QPQS based on only 3 saturations. Then how do you classify shunts? QPQS ratio of greater than 1.5:1. Anything less than that is a small shunt. Anything greater than 2:1 is a large shunt. Anything less than 1:1 is a right to left shunt. That's a very simple one. So there's nothing rocket science in that. So then you calculate PVR and SVR. I think all of you are aware of the formula. PA mean minus bench mean, or the LA mean divided by the cardiac output. It give you PVR. So cardiac index is what is here. We don't index PV or P pressures. We index cardiac index. So cardiac output is what is getting indexed. So that is why for converting PVR into PVRI, you need to multiply the body surface area. Are you clear? So then, yes, sir. Coming to a brief about the pulmonary vascular reactivity testing in shunt lesions. So it's a separate topic by itself. It needs maybe more than an hour to discuss on all the intricacies of that. But vasodilator testing, commonly 100% oxygen is given. We are actually looking at, in a VSD patient, generally looking at fall in mean and diastolic pressures, an increase in pulmonary blood flow, and reduction in the calculated PVR. But most importantly, we should consider dissolved oxygen in the calculation. This is how the aortic mean and the PA mean. And then the standard definition that you should know for what is an operable patient is anything greater than 6 is generally, less than 6 is absolutely operable. Anything greater than 6 is a cause of concern. And PPRI greater than 10 is generally inoperable, whatever be the rest of the values. The RP by RS of less than 0.3 and PVR of 6 to 8 may indicate operability. So coming to valve area calculations, I think all of you should be aware of the valve area calculations. So what is Hackey's formula for aortic valve area calculation?
Cardiac output upon root of peak pressure for aortic, peak or mean, and for mitral it is only root of mean pressure.
Okay, generally it's quite useful for aortic valve area, because mitral valve area it may not be very useful. Aortic valve area is quite consistent with whether you calculate with this Garlin or whether you calculate with the Hackey's, it's quite good. So it's just the cardiac output divided by the mean of root of mean gradient. That is what is Hackey's formula. So most of the time you'll be thrown a trace or something, then you'll be asked to know what is the aortic valve area. You should know that. So generally, another important thing that you should know is simultaneous PA wedge pressure and LVEDP tracing. So that is often shown, and you can see you'll be asked to know what is the LVED point in this. How do you calculate it? You can clearly see this is the LVED point here. At times you may not be seeing it nicely, then you have to look at from the top of the R wave, you have to draw a line and see where it is falls. That is the point where it is LVED. So you need to actually, when you're taking a PA wedge pressure instead of an LA pressure, you need to delay the trace that you need to do when you are calculating this thing. But nowadays most of the things are given up, and mostly we take whatever it is there and we use it. Then this is classical mitral stenosis traces, like you can see the A wave and the B wave. The previous image was patient was in AF. So what is this? This is actually a tall B wave following PTMC. So acute severe MR. The gradients have disappeared, but you can see a very tall B wave, and the overall mean pressure of LA has increased. So what is this? So there is no gradients. The post PTMC valve area is 0.6.
Step up at the level of RA.
That is a huge step up at the level of RA. So what could it be? Rutenbecker. So how an ASD alters the hemodynamics mix of mitral stenosis?
Decreases the gradient.
Increases the gradient. So oftentimes you may not find any gradient actually, right? Like in this case, despite having a low cardiac output. Another reason for that is patient is in heart failure and the SVC saturation is low. So that is another reason for why there is no gradient at all. Like one is there is an ASD that is decompressing and the patient has low cardiac output. That is why there are no gradients. So what is this? So this is a very important thing is to know the peak to peak versus peak instantaneous gradient. So why you get echo gradients which are higher is because echo is picking up this point. Clear? This is the difference between peak instantaneous gradient and peak to peak gradient. So you are looking at, when you are doing a cardiac catheterization, you are looking at peak to peak gradient, whereas echo is picking up this gradient. So that is why you will always have higher gradient when you are doing when you are measuring by continuous wave Doppler in echo. So what is this? It's a retrograde aortic cath, LV2 aorta pullback.
Subvalvular raise.
Subvalvular
raise.
It's a subvalvular AS. Why do you say so?
So because there is systolic gradient across LVOT.
Okay. So whenever, for clarity purpose, whenever you are shown such a trace, and oftentimes we expect everybody to get it right. Like many of you get it right, some of you get it wrong, and almost it's 50% of you get it wrong when such a trace is shown. So always think of, there are three traces in this any given picture. There are three different traces that are possible, that are available. So there are two LV type of traces, two ventricle type of trace, and one arterial type of trace is there. So that means clearly the gradient is between two ventricle type of trace. So that means it's the cavity, it's a intracavitary problem. Like when you have a gradient, and then it's typical, you can have a spike and dome trace of which is pretty typical of HOCM you can have. This is more likely to be a HOCM trace. So what is this?
Supravalvular.
Why you say so? Because the LV type of trace, and you have two aortic type of traces.
The diastolic pressure is equal to that of artery. So it's
so there are, this is happening definitely at the level of aorta. The obstruction is happening at the aorta. Why it is not coarctation of aorta?
Sir, because the systolic is same immediately after the LV.
It is continuous with the LV waveforms.
No, like there is a, for example, what I'm asking is you have a gradient happening between the ascending aorta and another level at aorta. So why it is not coarctation of aorta? Why it is supravalvular AS? That is my question.
There will be a diastolic gradient as well in coarctation.
So you don't have a diastolic gradient. Diastolic pressures are actually lower and diastolic pressures are the same. So you generally expect in a tight coarctation which is producing more than 100 gradient, you will expect a diastolic spillover in an echo also. So that means a diastolic gradient could also be there, and the diastolic is generally higher. Here the diastolic is below 100. So it has to be a supravalvular AS. So this is a very typical coarctation tracing. So what is this?
Spike and dome patterns.
Increased pulse pressure after the VPC.
Is this HOCM? The trace that I am showing?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Why?
The pulse pressure
Why?
does not increase. Only the systolic gradient increases.
So that's a very important thing that you have to know. Systolic pressure will increase in every patient, like any form of HOCM or no HOCM, it will increase. But most importantly, the pulse pressure has to increase. All of you are clear in this?
Yes.
So, yeah. So what is happening here?
So in the first half, there is a junctional rhythm going on.
So what has happened?
Rise in BP because of the sinus rhythm.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is the diagnosis like?
Like the aortic stenosis, sir. There is a
That is
gradient
definitely
between
an
the
aortic stenosis, and that is exaggerating the response. Like it has
yes,
to
sir.
be
The
severe.
loss of atrial kick is showing, sir.
Atrial kick is actually
when there is-
reducing the systolic blood pressure and increasing the gradient. So the importance of showing this trace is that whenever you are shown a trace, always look at the ECG at the top. The ECG gives a lot of clue. Immediately don't rush into the pressure trace all the time. Always just be cool, even if something that you have not seen, you're not able to pick up, just systematically see. There are only 3 lines in this thing. So always start with your ECG first and then go to your systematically analyze and see. It's very simple, nothing is there. It's again the same. Like, so what is this?
So constrictive pericarditis.
Constrictive pericarditis.
Why it's constrictive pericarditis? What is making you think it's constrictive pericarditis?
Sir, elevated pressures and prominent Y descent.
So equalization of diastolic pressure is a very common feature in all this constrictive physiology. So what are the differential diagnoses for this? When you have equalization
Constrictive
of
physiology
diastolic
and restrictive cardiomyopathy.
RCMs.
or so these are the various things that can happen. So decompensated left heart failure, RCMP, severe TR, and acute MR and RV infarction are the differential diagnosis for equalization of diastolic pressures. So what is being shown?
The left is constrictive pericarditis, sir. Right is RCM.
You can see RV and LV are discordant in the left image, and the right image RV and LV are concordant. So this is what differentiate between CCP and RCM. And what is this? What is LVR FW?
Rapid filling waves.
Left filling.
Yeah. So that is greater than 7 is a very, very good indicator of CCP. So what is it? So if anybody has to explain, suppose you have to teach your juniors the hemodynamics of CCP, what are the classical features of CCP on a cardiac catheterization trace? Basics like
Sir, exaggerated interventricular dependence.
Okay, one will be generally first and suppose some first year has come and he is asking, sir, cardiac catheterization करना मुझे CCP में क्या मुझे देखना है, what all I have to see. First of all, the pressures will be high, RA pressures will be high, the filling pressures will be very high, and then number 2, there will be equalization of diastolic pressures, and generally you don't find any PAH. Like generally PAH will be PA pressures won't be very high, unlike in RCMP. Then you come to the specifics, like what are the specific things? What are the basic hemodynamics that we are understanding? One is ventricular interdependence, that I think which all of you are knowing. What is this trace showing?
Dissociation of pressures.
What is it?
Dissociation of
there is a dissociation between intrathoracic pressures and the intrapulmonary pressures. That's a very important thing. So another important thing is the area, the concept of systolic area index, which is the RV area by LV area in inspiration divided by RV area and LV area in expiration. So a ratio of greater than 1.4 has a sensitivity of 97% for identification of CCP. And these are the various, I think this is something that all of you should know. I think we have put together one good article in Indian Heart Journal, which summarizes all the features of CCP and RCM, the hemodynamics of constriction and physiology in a very nicely summarized fashion. So these are the things that you should know, and out of which I think it's quite pretty simple. I think once you know the basic understanding why these things happen, then I think remembering all these things is not very difficult. Moving on. So what is this? The PA to RV pullback. So what is being shown?
Infundibular.
Yeah, it's a tight infundibular narrowing line. Then what is this?
This is valvular.
So this is totally a valvular PS. So this is the difference between the two. Like, so most likely when you do a pulmonary valve balloon dilatation, so you often find such trace like the one on the top. So how do you make sure that your gradient is at the valve level is not remaining? Oftentimes you have a valve like this, then you have once you open it up, generally what happens natural history wise, what happens to these infundibular narrowings like? How do you the question, you understand the question? You are doing a pulmonary valve balloon dilatation. So at the end, RV pressure is still high. You don't know whether it is because of the muscle that is there, which has become more active, or it is your really remaining valve gradient is there or not. Because you need to upsize the balloon if it's a valve gradient. Otherwise, you have to give beta blocker and follow the patient up for some time. Then I think muscle gradient generally disappears if the valve is nicely open. So how do you, based on the cardiac trace, how do you know? Anybody?
Pullback from
you are able to reproduce a trace like this, where you can take a small catheter on the wire, and then you can actually come down slowly and reproduce such a trace. Then you can know that definitely it is a gradient happening at the infundibular level. There is no gradient at the valve level. But such a trace generally is very difficult to obtain in children. Then you generally look at RV, whether it is a double peaking is there or not. You will find a classical double peak morphology in an infundibular PA. Then you find that, then you are reassured that I think mostly your valve is open. It's a tight infundibulum that has become hyperactive. and mostly you give metoprolol in the lab itself, the gradient generally comes down. So what is suicidal RV? What is suicidal RV?
Post pulmonary balloon valvotomy because of infundibular spasm, RV failure occurs.
So basically, infundibular spasm, the RV pressures become suprasystemic, and then the cardiac output falls, and then the patient actually crashes. So that can happen. That is called suicidal RV. So this is an extreme form of where the RV pressures will keep on increasing. You open the valve. Still, I think the RV infundibulum becomes into spasm, goes into spasm. So what is the difference between ventricularization and damping? Now coming to the guiding catheters now. So this is very common. Most of you will be doing coronary angiograms. So almost all of you will be doing coronary angiograms. So what is the difference between ventricularization and damping? And what is the importance? So in ventricularization, actually it is like a ventricular trace. The systolic pressures will remain at the top and then the diastolic falls. Whereas damping, both systolic and diastolic will fall. And damping is generally because of, and ventricularization is because of
Occlusion.
So ventricularization is like for example, you are getting a wedge pressure. So when you take a pulmonary venous wedge pressure, so what pressure you are measuring? Pulmonary capillary wedge pressure. So what pressure you will be getting?
LA pressure.
LA pressure. Same thing happens here. You occlude the coronary artery, there is no backflow. The catheter is actually measuring the ventricular pressure. That is what is ventricularization. Whereas damping is you are hitting against the wall, you are not coaxial, so that can produce damped waveform. Ventricularization almost always means significant left main disease or significant ostial narrowing or oversized catheter. Whereas damping may not be that. So another important thing that you should note is that the diastole also may show a prominent AV. I think if you are able to pick it up, that also indicates a probable left main disease. When you are having a ventricularized pressure form, you will get actually like this. You are getting a prominent A wave. This is another feature of a classical ventricularized pressure. So this is actually a damped coronary pressure. There is actually a typical. This is a very typical trace that can happen. Apart from the typical damping that you see, this is another typical deep throat. You can have a diastolic flattening with a pre-systolic dip. It's like the typical square root sign type of thing, like reverse of that. If that also happens, that again says dampening. So apart from the classical dampening that I told you, the ventricularization and dampening, when you are doing coronary angiograms, you have to look at two more things. Especially, oftentimes you are wondering whether there is left main or not. Then you always look for such a trace with a wave. And then if you are dampening, then you look for this kind of a waveform. This is quite common. You can find that in damped waveforms. So what is this?
One day. No,
ECG.
Arterial
ECG is there. Which one?
Yes, sir. IABP, sir. One.
Yeah, that's right. Like a lower arterial systole with a balloon assisted diastole. The same way you may be shown various traces. Like traces don't get confused, don't get overwhelmed. Just there are, like for example, in this trace you just have only two traces, like nothing else is there. So you look at the ECG and then immediately look at the waveform, and generally you will be able to make out what is it. And if it is multiple things are there, always schematically look at things, what is what. And then immediately you can bring out. And I don't think, and then CCP, RCM, you should know the traces. Like, so all the basics about CCP, RCM, you should know. What is a tamponade? What are the typical features of tamponade? Anyway, those things you know from your JVP for clinical exams also. So I think traces I don't think much is needed. This will be the basic level that you will be needed to know. So supravalvular AS, subvalvular AS, subvalvular PS, valvular PS, CCP, RCM, dampening, ventricularization. So I almost try to cover almost all the things that you should know in when it comes to the traces. Like now we move to the oximetry part and the pressure data sets that are given. So what is this?
Step up at the level of RE, sir. 70 to
Okay.
85%.
So, like first of all, when you are analyzing this acyanotic, number one is cyanotic or acyanotic. You look at this, it is a acyanotic patient. Okay, and then there is a step up at the RA level. Okay, done. Then
the saturation in pulmonary artery is 85. RA pressures are 5, V is 4, and mean is 5, and LA pressures is 10.
so what is it likely to be?
So there is a difference in the pressures in RA and LA, but there is a step up of.
So what is the likely cause?
PAPVC.
Huh?
PAPVC.
So most likely it's likely to be a PAPVC, not an ASD. All of you are with me. Why it is not an ASD?
Yes, sir.
RA and LA pressure.
So there is a big difference between RA pressure and the wedge pressure. If you have a large ASD, because if you have a step up of 13 step up. So how much step up is needed to have a significant step up? Say a significant step up. You have one sample.
11.
11, sir.
7.
So 7 and 11, right? That means 2 sets is 7 and then 11 is 1 set. So it is significant step up is there. But then you look at both the pressures, clearly the pressures are different. So you cannot have a large ASD which is producing a 14 step up, have pressures which are different. So this has to be a PAPVC. Clear? So what is this?
Systemic desaturation.
PAPVC.
PAPVC.
Yeah.
So what is the classical hallmark of TAPVC?
All equal.
So first of all, don't jump like whenever you want to discuss the oxygen saturation. First and foremost, look at the FAR iota. Make sure it's cyanotic or acyanotic. Oftentimes, as an examiner, when I ask students, invariably 20% of them mix up cyanotic and acyanotic also. So they don't even look at FA systematically. So look at FA first. Don't jump to anything else. Look at FA first. So FA is 88. Means what are the causes that what are the causes that you look at? That means there's a cyanotic congenital heart disease. So what are the causes you will look at? One is admixture physiology. So what is a typical admixture physiology? Where you will find all the saturation same beyond the chamber of mixing. Okay. So what is it likely to be? Likely to be which type of TAPVC?
Supracardiac TAPVC.
Supracardiac TAPVC. So all the saturations are same beyond the chamber of mixing. That is a very typical feature of admixture physiology. Then next physiology that is possible is a TGA physiology. So what is the typical feature of a TGA physiology on oximetry? Every one of you in this forum should know this. So what is the typical feature of
higher than aortic saturation?
So that is the hallmark. That is VA saturation more than aortic saturation is the hallmark of a TGA type physiology. And then most important cause, most common cause is a step down happening at aortic level or ventricular level in a patient with either PS or top-like physiology or Eisenmenger-like physiology. So these are the most common, three most common cause of cyanosis in any patient, in any given patient. So you can have a TAPVC or admixture, any form of admixture physiology. You will have a TGA type physiology, or you will have a step down happening at some level. So that's all you are supposed to look at when you have a cyanotic trace given to you. Okay, we go further. So you have to analyze the trace. I'm not asking you anything, but I'm just asking you what is your interpretation of the whole thing? How do you interpret like?
So SVC saturation is very low, so the patient is very sick.
Very sick. Patient is extremely sick because wedge pressure is V wave is 33. There is severe PAH. Then QS is 1.6 only. So likely to be an AVSD with severe MR.
AVSD, yes.
Severe MR is likely cause. So what is this?
RV is suprasystemic, sir.
So what about RA pressure? What is the cause like? Why are we suprasystemic?
Maybe a
Intact ventricular septum.
Intact ventricular septum.
is 65, sir, and LV.
But LA, look at LA. Like, so you say what she is saying is it could be intact ventricular septum, but if intact ventricular septum is there, with an ASD has to shunt right to left. Am I right?
Yeah.
So then in that case, actually the step down is actually happening at more step down is happening at LV to FL level, LV to IFL level. So LA is 93. So Hoffman variant, like. You understand? Like there are two possibilities. One is PS with intact ventricular septum, or you can have a TOF, a sick TOF with restrictive VSD. So how do you distinguish? LA has to be lower if it is PS with intact ventricular septum, because shunting will be right to left shunting will be happening at RA to LA. So the LA has to desaturate like more than this. So this is Hoffman variant. So when do you have a reverse of this happening? When you find a LV pressure which is suprasystemic in tetralogic physiology.
DORV, sir. DORV, sir.
DRV with? Huh?
DORV with the PS.
Restrictive VSD, sir.
Restrictive DORV with restrictive VSD with PS like. Basically, it is a DORV VSD PS where the VSD has become restrictive. That is the only condition on earth when you have a tetralogic physiology where the LV pressures can become suprasystemic. RV is connected to the system. LV is actually the only outlet for that LV is, we discussed in the class, like that produces a very heaving, hemodynamically significant AS like LV apex. Like that is the only condition hemodynamically in a tetralogic physiology where LV pressures are suprasystemic. Clear? So what is this?
Aortic saturation is lower than pulmonary artery saturation.
So immediately, first of all, start systematically, like you start describing an X-ray, you just get into the systematic habit. So look at aorta, which is desaturated, definitely cyanotic congenital heart disease. Then you immediately look at
RV and the LV pressures.
Yeah, aorta versus PA. PA is higher than aorta, so it's like a TGA type physiology. Then once you make sure that look at other saturation, everything is consistent with TGA type physiology. Then you immediately look at whether RV is connected to aorta. Yes, it is connected. RV is connected to aorta, whereas LV is connected into PA.
But RV and the LV pressures are not equal. So
RV and LV pressures are not equal. So either has to be a Small restrictive
Intact.
VSD or intact septum.
Intact septum.
And what else?
ASD, like RA pressures and LA pressures.
RA pressure
Less
and LA pressure, same. Like I told you that there are only 4 things you need to look at. Like you need to start looking at the pressures whether normal or abnormal. Then you start looking at another pressure in the line. Then you connect RA into LA and then look at RB into LB. We compare both. So clearly, as she's saying, they are not equal. So that means there is no restrictive, there is no under-restrictive VSD. If both are equal, you think generally there is an unrestricted VSD. Same way, these two are equal and likely to be an ASD which is adequate. So the complete diagnosis will be TGA with intact ventricular septum and a non-restrictive ASD most likely. That is why the patient is saturating 70 at 3 years. So what will you do now for this child? Three years with a TGA with intact ventricular septum with a LV pressure of 42 compared to RV pressure of 95.
Atrial switch.
Atrial
Can
switch.
you do a switch? The data that is showing is asking you the concept. What is the concept like? Can you do a switch or what else will you do? When you have a TGA which is presenting late, so what is the threshold for pressures? RV versus LV? How much
LV training we do first.
For 3 years, can you do an LV training with this kind of pressures? So what LV training will be done?
So PA banding.
So if you do a PA band at 70 saturation, the patient will crash on table. You do only PA band. So the options for this patient are: you put the patient on a high risk direct switch and an ECMO support, or you can do what is known as 2-stage switch, where you do a PA band with the BT shunt, and then keep the sternum open. When the LV gets retrained, you can go for a switch. But at 3 years, generally both are not possible, especially when you have. Then generally you take a chance if the pressures are 2/3 systemic. Like if LV is 2/3 of RV, then you can take a chance. But if it is less than that, generally it is better to send the patient for sending pathway, especially at 3 years. So less than 1 year, you can try all those things, but at 3 years, with this kind of pressure, the patient will go for a sending. Am I clear?
Yes.
This I wanted to show for one reason. So this is an oximetry data. So what is whether the patient is operable or inoperable? I'll show the oxygen data also.
Pulse pressure, pulmonary artery less than 40%, inoperable.
What you said? Pulse pressure of? Maybe. Do you look at that as the first thing?
So PVR by SVR ratio is less than 0.3. The patient is operable after giving oxygen.
After giving oxygen, the patient is operable. Before giving oxygen, the PVR is 15.8. So this slide I keep on exam just to know what is the concept we can look at as a primary thing. So number one, what is the most important number one point that you look at in this slide, whole slide?
Age of the patient.
Very good. We look at 16-year-old. We are all looking at a 16-year-old patient, not a 1-year-old or a 6-year-old patient. It's totally different. The operability decision is totally dependent on the age. Is a very important factor. Number one. Number two, you look at the basic data I've said. You look at the mean pressures. You generally look at the mean pressures, the PA versus FA pressures. They are nearly systemic. And then you look at the FA saturation. Any desaturation in FO in a baseline set in the absence of a iatrogenic factor is generally considered inoperable, whatever be the rest of the things. So FA is 93, it is borderline. These pressures are very high. Now you come to the calculated numbers. The PVR is 15.8 and the QPQ is 1.5. So the primary purpose of you closing the thing is to reduce the shunt. So already the shunt is 1.5:1. So still it could be borderline, but then PVRA is 15.8. We will keep it 15.5 at 16 years is generally inoperable. Then why the oxygen study is so positive? Anybody can answer this? Because what happens with oxygen saturation is it becomes from 68 it becomes 88. So actually the QP becomes torrential, like the QP actually is 10.7 here. Then you whatever we have calculated PVRA is pretty low. But once you include dissolved oxygen, the QP here was 6.8 and the PVRA of 10 units. You can look at this. The wedge is 400, PA is 107. These are the PO2s, 268. Once you take dissolved oxygen into consideration, you will get a QP of 6.8 and PVRA of 10. Clearly, the patient is inoperable. So, what is the important message from this slide is look at the age of the patient first and look at the numbers carefully. Basal PVRA is very important. Basal saturation is very important. Then rest of the calculated values are important. And most importantly, when you do an oxygen study, always take dissolved oxygen into consideration. These are some of the errors that can creep into the cardiac catheterizations. So the pressure recording in oximetry, you can leave a air bubble or saline in the syringe. You can delay sending the samples. You can use ABG sample to estimate the oxygen saturation, but unfortunately, most of us don't have the saturation estimators anymore. So we are just relying on ABG only. And there are various assumptions in calculation that are there, like assumed VO2 is a major thing, assumed pulmonary vein oxygen saturation is a major problem, and then flow corrected by body surface area, and then failure to account for dissolved oxygen to the oxygen study are the one that are very important. This is for you to know. Not only you have to understand the things and say in exam, but you should know the errors that to be avoided when you're actually doing a cardiac catheterization studies. So most importantly, when you're recording the pressures, the transducer level is very important. You should avoid over-damping or under-damping. Wedging of the catheters, use of multi-hole catheter for withdrawal gradients are not to be used. So measurements made during unstable hemodynamics due to arrhythmia, acidosis, hypotensation are very common, and they actually are the more important source of errors. So now what is this? Anybody start speaking?
Sir,
Hope you're not all slept.
IVP to LA.
So where is the step down happening?
At the LA.
Okay, pulmonary vein to LA is the desaturation happening. And what is the pressures? Pressures are normal, absolutely normal pressures. No gradient anywhere, no pressures. Absolutely normal pressures, no gradient. The pressures is normal. This is a very typical prototypic set that is given, and you have to approach when you are given like this. Desaturation is there or not. So LA is desaturating. That means the causes are different. When you look at LA versus RA, you look at here again, RA is different and LA is different. It cannot be common atrium. Why it cannot be common atrium? Because the pressures are different. So you have to look at the pressures here, and then always look at pulmonary vein saturation. So pulmonary vein itself is desaturated. The causes are different. And then if it is iatrogenic or not, you should look at. I told you the previous causes, like how to approach them, the pulmonary vein desaturation, desaturation at the LA level. So all the features like Epstein anomaly, unroofed coronary sinus, anomalous systemic venous drainage, all these are differential diagnosis for this trace. So before I conclude, I want to re-emphasize when you are thrown a pressure trace, always have a systematic approach. Start from your ECG. Clearly identify the waveforms which chamber they belong to. Always look at the scale and then make up your mind what traces are they and what is the inference of the study. Never jump immediately to a conclusion. And similarly, when you are shown the oximetry table or a data set, always have a systematic approach. Look at first thing is cyanotic or acyanotic. If it is cyanotic, identify the patterns like admixture physiology or TGA physiology, which all of you are aware what is it. And then if it is not there in the cyanotic, you identify the cause of step down. And then look at the cause of step up, which level it is happening. already we have enumerated the cost of step down and step up. Generally, remember when you are asked to enumerate what are the cost of step up at the RA level, immediately think of one level higher and one level lower and things that can happen at that level. And then the RSOV and the coronary fistula can happen to any level. When it comes to the pressure data set, you look at whether the pressures are normal or abnormal, then always link the pressures next in line. What I say is RA mean, link it to RV-EDP, RV systolic pressure, link it to PA pressure. Immediately you will identify the gradients. And before come to a conclusion in a congenital case, always compare RV pressure to LV pressure, RA pressure to LA pressure systematically. So I think with this, you will be able to crack whatever waveform you are given and whatever cath case that is given to you. Any questions? I am okay to answer. Like,
Hello, sir. How to calculate dissolved oxygen, sir?
it is same calculation. You have to actually calculate the content based on the formula. Like, so you calculate the oxygen content. Like, so you generally the oxygen in the oxygen content calculation, the dissolved oxygen is actually taken for granted that it is not a significant contributor. So you have to add the dissolved oxygen into consideration. I said the formula. It is there in the formula, but then you have removed it because it is generally negligible. When you calculate the oxygen content in a pulmonary vein oxygen content, or you take pulmonary arterial oxygen content or mixed venous oxygen content, you are generally removing the dissolved oxygen part because it is not significant. You just have to add that.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir, in the data set of the PVC, sir, so can it also represent the restrictive ASD, sir?
The restrictive ASD cannot produce step up. So step up is not possible with the restrictive ASD. The 12 are holding step up there in that case. So that is a very significant step up that cannot happen with the restrictive ASD.